Chapter 2, The Ministry of Psychic Hygiene, Part 1. Rain fell greasy and gray over Vienna by morning. Coal smoke hung low between buildings, trapping the city beneath a lid of soot-colored clouds. Streetcars screeched along iron rails, while bundled pedestrians hurried past walls covering government notices printed in stern black type. Avoid reflective surfaces after dusk. Report recurring dreams to your local phrenological officer. Unlicensed symbolism invites contamination. Freud hated the posters. He hated the uniforms more. The Ministry of Psychic Hygiene occupied the former Imperial Natural History Museum, though very little natural history remained inside anymore. Stone gargoyles above the entrance had acquired extra faces over the years. Workers chiseled them off weekly. New ones always grew back by Thursday. Freud and Jung climbed the museum steps beneath the gaze of armed attendants in gray surgical coats. Young men mostly, nervous hands, sleep-starved eyes. Each carried a regulation-issue cognition disruptor at the hip, ugly brass devices designed to interrupt localized psychic manifestations through sonic trauma. Ministry engineers called them rationalizers. Common people called them headcrackers. A guard stepped forward. Recognition flashed across his face immediately. Doctors. His voice tightened. Freud enjoyed the discomfort. Jung ignored it. The guard's gaze lingered uneasily on Jung's mechanical eye glass before he stepped aside. Dr. Weiss expects you downstairs. Of course he does, Freud muttered. Inside, the museum smelled of antiseptic and candle wax. Glass cases once filled with fossils now house impossible objects recovered from psychic incidents. Bleeding statues, journals that wrote replies to readers, a violin grown from human cartilage. Several objects twitched as they passed. A woman in nurse whites hurried across the marble hall carrying a sealed metal container pressed against her chest. Something inside scratched frantically at the lid. Freud watched her disappear down a corridor. The containment wards keep failing, Jung observed quietly. They built bureaucracy around a metaphysical infection. Failure feels inevitable. Jung smirked faintly. There's the Sigmund I remember. Freud gave him a sidelong glance. You remember arrogance because you mistook it for confidence. And you mistook curiosity for betrayal, Jung replied. The words landed hard. Old word wounds breathed between them again. Neither man spoke as they descended deeper into the ministry. The lower levels had once stored archaeological collections. Now they resembled a military hospital designed by occultists. Copper wiring covered every wall in branching patterns that mimicked the human nervous system. Massive humming image engines pumped sedative vapor through iron pipes overhead. Orderlies pushed carts bearing restraints stained with blood and charcoal. Somewhere nearby, a man screamed continuously without pausing for breath. Freud lit another cigar. You filled catacombs with frightened bureaucrats and electrical coils. Remarkable progress. Jung stopped beside a reinforced observation window. Inside the chamber beyond, a teenage boy sat restrained in a steel chair, thin, pale, and terrified. Shadows gathered around him, unnaturally thick, despite the bright overhead lamps. As Freud watched, one shadow detached itself from the floor. It stood upright behind the boy, long arms, featureless face, a silhouette pretending to be human. The boy began sobbing. It follows him everywhere, Jung said quietly. Ministry analysts classified as unresolved paternal anxiety. Freud studied the thing carefully. The shadow turned its blank face toward him. It smiled without possessing a mouth. No, Freud murmured. That's hunger. Jung glanced over. You see it too. I see a parasite wearing symbolism. The creature slammed itself against the observation glass. Cracks spread instantly. Several attendants shouted. The boy screamed as darkness poured upward across his skin like spilled ink. Jung moved first. He pulled another brass cylinder free while Freud barked sharply at the nearby attendants. Open the vapor lines. Increase the sedation pressure immediately. No authorization. Freud turned around on the man and started with startling fury. If that thing fully externalizes, authorization becomes irrelevant. The attendant scrambled for the controls. Inside the chamber, the shadow stretched taller. Its limbs bent at angles that had no name. The room darkened despite the lights burning overhead. Frost crawled across the glass. A face appeared beneath the darkness, a man's face, bruised, half-rotten, eyes filled with accusation. That's his father, Young realized. Freud's expression hardened. That's the boy's idea of his father. The shadow creature opened its mouth impossibly wide. Young activated the brass cylinder. The invisible scream hit the chamber like a hammer. The creature recoiled, spasming as symbols burned across his body in lines of blue fire. Freud stepped into the intercom. Listen carefully, son, Freud said. The boy managed barely to look up. Freud's voice softened slightly, the way a skilled doctor's hand guides a scalpel. What did your father say to you before he died? The boy trembled. He said I should have been stronger. The creature swelled instantly. Its arms lengthened and bones cracked beneath the darkness. Freud nodded grimly. There you are. Young looked sharply towards him. You're feeding it. I'm identifying the emotional anchor, Freud replied. The creature smashed one arm against the glass. A spiderweb crack spread across the entire window. Attendants backed away in panic. Freud leaned closer to the microphone. You hated him for saying it. The boy froze. There was silence. And then a small yes. The word came out tiny and horrified, as though the boy had never heard himself say it aloud. And perhaps he hadn't. The creature convulsed, its body destabilized, features flickering rapidly between forms. Freud's eyes sharpened. There's the contradiction. Young understood instantly. He stepped forward and slammed the cane against the containment glass. Symbols ignited blue-white. Name him, Young ordered. The boy stared through the tears. What? Name what he became inside your mind. The creature shrieked. The boy squeezed his eyes shut. A coward, he whispered. The shadow collapsed. Darkness imploded inward like paper burning in reverse. The chamber's light steadied. Frost melted from the glass. The boy slumped unconscious in the chair. Silence filled the corridor. One attendant crossed himself. Another looked nauseous. Freud stepped away from the intercom. You see the problem, Freud said. Young nodded slowly. The psyche stopped metaphorizing. Freud lit his cigar again. Humanity taught its fears to walk around wearing flesh.